Hi there, today I'd like to show you how to make the invisible join. But before I start doing that, I wanted to show you what I have here. This is just a sample of some rounds that I've worked. And when I was finished, I completed it with a slip stitch instead of an invisible join. And when you finish it with a slip stitch, there is this distinguishable little bump here that's left from the slip stitch, and it just makes it so it's not quite a smooth finish, and it just doesn't look very good. I mean, it's okay, but it doesn't look as nice. So if you wanted to have a nice clean finish to your rounds, then that's where the invisible join comes in. And the invisible join is usually talked about in contrast to rounds where you are joining with slip stitches, but I want to point out that you can use the invisible join in continuous rounds as well. I have done that, and it is very useful in helping me to finish off my continuous rounds and make everything look nice and smooth there as well. So it's kind of nice to keep an open mind that the invisible join can be used for both finishing off rounds where you have joined with slip stitches and rounds where you are working in a spiral. So now I'm going to show you how to work the invisible join, and we're going to do this in the first stitch of our round. And then when I'm done showing you how to do it, I'm going to explain to you when it would be a good time for you to work the invisible join in the second stitch of the round instead of the first. Okay, so how to do the invisible join. When you're at the final stitch of your round, what you'll do is just pull that tail out, and then you're going to need a needle for this part. Oops. And if I can get this through, there we go. Okay, so to do the invisible join, the technique is that you will just run the tail underneath both the front and back loop of the first stitch of the round, or I'll give you reasons later for why you would use the second stitch, okay? But you'll run it under the the front and back loop. So run that tail through there like that. Oops, and I'm getting caught here. There we go. And I like to pull this down out a little bit more so that it's starting to match the size of the other stitches. Okay, then what you'll do is you'll go back down between the front loop and back loop of your last stitch. So you can see where my needle's between, or you could also say right down the center of the last stitch. And you'll just pull that down through here. And then go ahead and shrink that down so that it matches all the other stitches in that round. Then what you'll do is you'll just finish this off on, or fasten off, I should say, on the wrong side of your work. And I should have mentioned that you can enter from the front of your work or the back of your work when you're beginning that invisible join. It really doesn't matter. It gives the same effect either way. Okay, so now that you've seen how to do that, why would you want to invisible join to the second stitch of your round? So I'm going to still do this and still show you while I'm talking. Because the invisible join is so good at looking just like all the other stitches, it can easily be mistaken as having accidentally worked an additional stitch in your round. And nobody cares about that if you are completely done with your project and no one's going to go back, and you're not going to go back and count all your stitches to make sure your stitch count matches. But it is going to matter if you're not actually done with your project and you still plan on adding on to it. If you're adding on to it, then your stitch count is going to be off because this looks very much like an extra stitch. And so if you don't want to run into that problem of having an extra stitch and not having to remember where the invisible join is or anything like that, an easy way to get around that is instead of working your invisible join into the first stitch and then that creates the invisible join that looks just like everything else. That's why we like it. That's why it looks smooth. But then when you go back and count it, it looks like an extra stitch is there, and it would count, it would look like there was an extra one worked. I guess that's all it really is. Instead of going through the first one, you can instead work your invisible join into the second stitch of the round. And like I said before, you can enter from the front of your work or you can enter from behind. It really doesn't matter. So you would go into your second stitch of the round if you don't want your stitch count to be thrown off because you are adding onto your project. So just do the same thing as before, just go under both the front and back loop of the second stitch, kind of shrink this down, and then you'll come back around, and once again you'll go between the front and back loop of the final stitch, or in other words, right down the center. And then you'll just kind of shrink this down so that it matches all the other stitches. Shrink it, shrink it, shrink it. And then what happens in that case is that the invisible join now sits on top of your first stitch of the round. So it's sort of doubled up as it were, I guess you can put it that way. And in that case, since it's sitting on top of the first stitch, then your stitch count is exactly the same if you're planning on adding onto your project. So that's another way to still work the invisible join when you want the stitch count to remain the same. Okay, I think that is all that I need to teach you. And the last thing is you can do this with the joined rounds and continuous rounds, both of them, both kinds, just like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Thanks.